Good morning, and welcome back to day 2 of the Sustainable Future Week here at Politico. I'm Federica Di Sario. I'm a climate reporter for Politico, and today I'm very excited because we will start with this panel on Europe's bid to stay in the clean tech race. We are very lucky to have such a stellar panel here, and we can start with Kurt van der Berge. He's the Director General at DG Klima, the Commission. We also have Jakob Dalunde. He's a member of the Greens Party at the European Parliament from Sweden. Susanna Karp, she is the Deputy Executive Director for Clean Tech for Europe. And also Georg Zechmann, he's a Senior Fellow at economic think tank Bruegel. Welcome, everybody. So today we will be talking about the Europe's bid in the clean tech race. As I said, yesterday we had another panel which was about the Net Zero Industry Act. So of course the two discussions will be very interlinked. But what I really want to do with you today is to look in particular at what can be done right now, and also all the different possibilities to fund the green transition, to fund clean tech manufacturing in Europe. I would like to start with you, Kurt. So in the speech of Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, so in the State of the Union speech, she was very clear that the future of the clean tech industry needs to be made in Europe. And so, I mean, this reflects a very clear shift that there has been in the Commission. We have been very clear about the need to strengthen our security, to be more strategic in the manufacturing capacity that we have in Europe, and especially of these technologies that will be needed to reach net zero by mid-century. But the question that comes to mind is to what extent from an economic standpoint, because it's going to be hard if we start to be very protectionist and we start to want to build clean tech manufacturing that we don't have a lot of competitive advantage right now on. It's going to take a toll on already cash-strapped government budgets. So to what extent should we do that?
Good morning, Federica, and good morning, participants. I obviously agree with the Commission President that we need to do this for a number of reasons. One is that with Fit for 55 and our climate and energy policy, we are creating a massive market in Europe for clean tech and green products. And if we want to sustain our climate ambition, we cannot afford that this market is only supplied from outside Europe. So that's why for us it's very strategic and crucial that we have this. But also we have learned the hard way what it means to be dependent on other parts of the world. We've experienced that during the COVID pandemic, and we have seen this with the fossil fuel dependency, the gas dependency on Russia, for example. But also very important is that if we lose that manufacturing capacity for clean tech or net zero industry technologies, we also lose the whole innovation potential. We need to keep a critical minimum of this manufacturing in Europe to also have the possibility to innovate into the next generation of these technologies. So that's why we set in the Net Zero Industry Act the aggregate target of 40% of manufacturing capacity in Europe. We didn't go for 100% because 100% is obviously not possible. And also we have a policy of open strategic autonomy. It's not that we want to close off our market entirely, but we need that minimum of 40%. 40% is a simple, simplistic aggregate figure that covers a very complex reality. But it's good to say that for some of these technologies, we are already at or close to 40%. Mm-hmm. For some of these technologies like wind and heat pumps, we have way more than 40%. But even there, like for wind, we cannot be complacent. We also there need to be very vigilant and help to scale up. And that's why we came with the wind package very recently. It's not only about the end products, the panels, the windmills. It's also very much about the components, like for solar panels, the wafers, the ingots, the solar cells, for batteries, the anodes and cathodes. And what is really good about ENZIA, which is currently under negotiation in the Parliament, and we're following very closely the discussions in the Parliament, we become more granular in looking at these value chains. And we will get more intelligence as to where are our vulnerabilities and where do we have to take policy action to make sure that we address these vulnerabilities. And the last point I would want to make, or two last points, one is that we need a lot more orchestration in Europe between the European level and the national level. I don't like the word coordination because everyone agrees with coordination needed, but no one wants to be coordinated. So that's why I prefer the word orchestration. That's what we will do through the Net Zero Europe platform, where we will work with member states on a more orchestrated, joined-up way in promoting this manufacturing in Europe. And the last point, I note that manufacturers themselves in Europe have higher ambitions than what we have said in the Net Zero Industry Act. For wind and heat pumps, for example, for electrolyzers, the manufacturers want to cover 100% of the deployment needs from within Europe. For solar, it's 45%, and the European Battery Alliance talks about aiming at 90%. So our ambitions are realistic if we look at what the manufacturers themselves want to do.
Okay, perfect. And Georg, I'm coming to you because I know that you have also looked into this with your research for Bruegel. I believe that your point of view is quite different. You believe that we cannot pay the same attention to all technologies, and we should focus instead on those that really have a competitive edge compared to other countries, because in this way we could earn more. And so now I want to play double advocate with you. Shouldn't we, isn't it a small price to pay to afford energy security and the ability to take more ownership of our clean transition?
No, very good questions, thank you. I think the challenge that we are having is that we currently need to put a lot of resources on many things. And resources is not just money at the moment. Resources currently is scarce labor, skilled labor, is scarce capital, and we need to put that in place in a very, very smart way so that we get most out of it. And if we put our scarce resources on things that others can do much better than us, then we are not earning any value added from that, and we cannot exchange with them on those things that we need from them. So in my view, what we want to do is we want high-wage jobs in Europe. We want, therefore, value added to be created in Europe. And the transition is a huge opportunity for us because it plays to our strengths. We have a big market that helps us to grow things. We have a very long-term system that allows us to give predictability to investors, to everybody, which many other countries in the world do not have. We have relatively low capital cost in Europe compared to the rest of the world. We have significant skills. So we can win a lot from the transition, but we need to do those things that we are good at. So what should we not do? We should not defend the old. We should not defend the old technologies or go for also the historic renewables that others have catched up with us and are better because they have much cheaper energy than us to produce solar panels or batteries. We should not defend old industrialized regions if that's not useful. So we should not bring energy to places at very high cost just to produce something there because it always has been there because there were coal mines. And we should be very worried about global overproduction in some areas. So if you look into what the Chinese and Americans are investing in some things, I mean, we might see kind of like the steel boom some 40, 50 years back, that there's huge overcapacities, and then the problems get even bigger and the drive for protectionism. So what should we do? In my view, specialization. So as you lined out, I don't think that 40% overall for everything is a good idea. We need, in some things, we need to be good. In some things, we can import, and we should very smartly decide what we want to do. We need to defend the European market. That's extremely important because it's one of the value creators. And if you, for example, see in terms of regional specialization, we should leverage what we have. We should not put our kind of battery manufacturing in regions that need to build new gas-fired power plants that get gas from Russia, like Hungary is currently planning for their huge battery production spree. I don't think that makes much economic sense in my view. We should focus on sectors with promise, and we have them. We have the innovative capacity. I mean, just one example: perovskite solar panels. It's new innovation. We are working on it, and it means that if we get it done, maybe triple layer things with extremely high energy efficiency. At the same time, they use much less energy in being produced. So if we can go for this new technologies, that's where we are going to make a difference. Another area where we are potentially very good at, and where I see huge value added in the future, is system management. These new systems, we don't know how to manage them yet. It's going to be very complex, and in the European markets, we have a lot of testing ground for that. So there is where we can become the Amazons of electricity, in a sense, where the real value is there to pay our people high wages, and not go for the solar panels from 10 years ago. And in terms of policy, I would focus as much as possible on things that kind of are less targeted in picking winners, but more general, like education, research support, and European competitive solutions, like European contracts for difference rather than national ones. Thank you.
Thank you. Jakob, you're working actively on the file, as Kerr mentioned, so in the Net Zero Industry Act for the ITRE committee. Do you see these discussions playing out also in the debates that you're having? I mean, you have finalized the position of the ITRE committee by now. How do you see this discussion playing out?
I mean, I agree that over the past few decades, we went too far in offshoring and not caring where in the world things were manufactured as long as the costs were low. Yes, we went too far. But I don't necessarily think that the pendulum should swing all the way back. I don't think that we should overemphasize in going into pure protectionism. Yes, we should do some reshoring, but we should also do friendshoring, not exposing ourselves to foreign actors who might not have either their own citizens' best interests at heart or global peace. There are actors in this world who behave in an authoritarian way towards their own citizens and imperialistic towards their neighbors. We should reduce our dependency on them. But that doesn't mean that we could have a strong cooperation with Brazil or Mexico or South Korea or Japan and create value chains together with them. So I think there needs to be a fair amount of balancing between reshoring and friendshoring. I actually don't support the way that the IRA is designed, as it's very narrowly focused on manufacturing within the US. I don't think that Europe should copy that. I think we should rather work together with our neighbors and form a partnership with the US. And make sure that the things that we reshore to Europe are the things that we have a competitive advantage on. But if there are other parts of the world that can do some parts of the green value chain better, I think we should let them, and not necessarily do that as well, but in a more inefficient way, because there's a lot of work to be done in the green transition. There's plenty of work for everybody. Mm-hmm.
And Susanna, you work on these issues daily because you work for Clean Tech for Europe, so your mission is really to scale up the innovative companies in Europe. And because of the nature also of Clean Tech for Europe, you have a very, you closely watch what's happening across the Atlantic. So I'm wondering, what's your view? Do you think it's really a problem, that the EU is losing progressively competitiveness, and it is also partially funding the R&D of Chinese competitors through some programs such as the Horizon program? Good morning, everyone, and thanks a lot for having me here, and thanks for the really good questions, Federica. I would like to maybe start by emphasizing that really the transformation to net zero has really just begun. And so the sort of economic opportunity and the scale of this transformation, they're actually unprecedented. We are looking at opportunities in the trillions. And so it is no surprise then to see that other parts of the world are hedging their bets to have their greatest, let's say, access to these future markets that are being created. I think the whole purpose of public policy is to really bridge into the sort of needs and preferences of the future economy. And when it comes to the net zero economy and to the European Union, we know what those needs and preferences are. We want to decarbonize our economy. We also want to develop energy resilience, and we want to develop industrial leadership. And so this final point is, in fact, Cleantech for Europe's main focus and our vision on the discussion. This shouldn't be about protectionism, because let's look around the world. The world has fundamentally shifted. We're seeing that even in the UK, there's actually requirements for domestic components in things such as wind energy. And we're seeing that the previous model that we used to think as the American model, the free market model, is no longer the American model. So the world has fundamentally shifted towards exactly a more targeted approach to developing industrial policy that allows countries to be competitive in this new net zero world that we're trying to build. And so that's exactly what the European Union should do. And in our view, we should really be focusing on kind of what are the next big opportunities for Europe where it can develop industrial leadership. And some of these sectors, for example, electrolyzers, are already identified on the Net Zero Industry Act Annex as sectors where indeed we do have a comparative advantage at the moment. And so if we continue building on this, we can secure industrial leadership for the next decades. And there are many sectors like that. Now, in terms of what we discussed earlier, so the example on solar PV, I think it's really important to note that actually producing some of that in Europe would effectively mean that it's, on one hand, less carbon intensive, but also, secondly, it would be a return of the solar industry partly to Europe, because that's exactly the example that we're trying to prevent from happening again, a solution that develops in Europe, but that exactly at the scale-up phase industrializes elsewhere, simply because we don't have in place the financial infrastructure that is needed to develop industries of the future here. So in a sense, I think that example is really good. And, but again, even when it comes to older renewables, let's say solar and wind, to some extent, we're still in the early phases of the profound transformation. And so I think let's learn from the lessons and let's make sure not to repeat the same mistakes.
Mm-hmm. And just a quick follow-up, what do you mean by we are missing the financial architecture that we need?
Right, so our research, which is based on a very robust database that analyzes VC investment in clean tech in Europe, has noticed that there's actually, so while we're still doing really good at attracting early stage investment, the moment where companies try to move from raising, let's say, tens of millions to validate their concepts to actually commercialize their concepts. So they're moving to raising hundreds of millions in that instruments. Or so that's exactly where there is a massive gap in Europe. I think others have referred to it in the past as the valley of death. And so, but this is really a metaphor that I try to stay away from. But it's just to highlight the fact that it's not necessarily an unknown phenomenon. It's just that we haven't fully stepped forward as the European Union to really address exactly the missing piece of the puzzle in this whole in this whole scheme. And unfortunately, what we're seeing in the current discussions is that we're still not doing that right now. We were very much looking forward to having a European sovereignty fund, and then very much looking forward to other sorts of instruments that would go along with that. But what's currently on the table is still not sufficient to actually fill this investment gap at the moment.
Okay, and Kurt, obviously the question is to you now. How do we bridge the gap that Susanna is talking about? And also, are we ever going to have a European sovereignty fund?
Yeah. First, let me say that I agree with everything that has been said, and we need to prioritize. We cannot do everything. That's why we propose a few choices in the NZIA. We see how hard it is for member states and politicians to make choices, but we need to prioritize, very important. We need to specialize, so we really need to invest in the next generation technologies. But we also know that we can't do this if we don't have a minimum of manufacturing capacity in Europe. Otherwise, the innovation doesn't work. The perovskite solar panels are very important. I think that's where Europe should take leadership. But if you have no manufacturing capacity for solar, you won't have it. It will also go away. And we need to friendshore. Absolutely agree with you. We need to have really win-win partnerships with the rest of the world. Second thing I would like to say is, let's not downplay the benefit of the IRA for climate policy globally. We have seen studies that show that for every ton of CO2 that is saved thanks to IRA support, there will be another 2.5 tons elsewhere in the world saved as well. And this makes that the US and China together are now really making big strides in the climate action, which is good for global climate ambition. They have published a declaration, a joint statement this morning, which clearly signals that China, and this is incredibly important, that China will peak and then reduce emissions during this decade. We always were afraid that China would peak in 2030 somewhere and then stay at a high level. We now know that they could peak already next year, and then they want to reduce, thanks to also an ETS like Europe. And we're now working with China to help them build up such an ETS. And all this is because climate action is seen as a prosperity-enhancing agenda. It's an economic agenda for building the future. Now, to your question of the sovereignty fund, we have proposed the step, as you know, suboptimal, in my view. But even that, we see it's very difficult to get support among member states for this. It's different in the European Parliament, thank you very much. But where we see that the likelihood of getting additional money for STEP is not that big. So we need to look at other solutions, and that's why we are building up the innovation fund that we have as an alternative to the sovereignty fund. We have 40 billion euros left this decade, including for clean manufacturing. We already have a number of projects that go into clean tech manufacturing. We will launch a new call next week with a 4 billion budget, including for clean tech manufacturing, including for auctions for subsidizing the production of renewable hydrogen. First ever we do this at European level. But very importantly, and that's where I make the link with the sovereignty fund, we're now building up these auctions and the innovation fund as a service to member states. So that when there are projects or bids that we cannot fund because of lack of money in the innovation fund, we give the facility to member states to use their ETS revenues, their cohesion funds, their recovery and resilience funds to pick up those projects or bids on their territory and fund this with their money, with state aid facilitation that we offer in cooperation with DG Competition. So that for auctions, for example, the awards will be given within 2 months. And it's in a European mechanism. We bring in national money without having it in the European budget. And in this way, if this takes off, and we already have 1 member state that will join this next week for the hydrogen pilot, we will announce that later this week or next week. If this can take off, then we have a very good potential way of building a sovereignty fund, doing it à l'européenne, not centralized everything in Brussels, but really joined up with the member states.
Mm-hmm. Georg, I would like to hear your view on what Kurt just said, because I mean we know that carbon pricing is of great importance as a way to raise capital to finance the green transition. This is a panel of carbon nerds, it seems. So I'm sure that we all agree on this. But is it enough? Because it seems now that everything is relying on the innovation fund, which is totally fed by the ETS revenues. Is it enough as a way to raise the amount of money that we need?
Well, in principle, the ETS has much more money than the Innovation Fund has. So, I mean, it is a question of prioritization of where the ETS money is going. And I think, if I'm not wrong, I think more money goes into the modernization fund that is on all technologies than on the innovation fund. And so significantly more can be done in terms of prioritization here. So scaling up the innovation fund would make a lot of sense for me. And what I particularly like about the innovation fund is European competitive approach, so that really companies in different member states apply and compete over that money, which ensures that we get the right technologies in the right places in Europe, and not just member states try to focus on things that they think they want to have, rather than which are good from a European efficiency standpoint, which is politically difficult. That's why it's probably one of the reasons why it's not moving ahead. If I may, one short sentence on what Kurt said also on the keeping some production in Europe. For being innovative. I would underline that. I think the choice is not between 0 and 40%, but maybe somewhere in between, in my view. So we need some production facilities in order to have a market for the tools, and the tools are maybe where the value added is going to be. So the machines that build the solar panels, and the machines that help us with the wind turbines. So that is where probably a lot of value is going to be, and for that we need a certain industry. For innovation we need it, and also as a sort of break out ability in case that something happens globally. We might need some industry that we have the skills here and are able to quickly scale up from 10 to 100% if need be. But we don't need full autarky at every stage, because we don't have full autarky in textiles, and everybody needs to dress. And we have a industry that is left there, and it's if we need, we can, but we don't have to at all the time. In normal times, we buy the stuff from elsewhere.
Okay, Susanna, quickly also on the carbon pricing and the innovation fund, because so as I said, you work for Clean Tech for Europe. One of the pains of the clean tech ecosystem in Europe is that it struggles to scale up, as you said. So the problem is not that we don't have innovation. And one of the criticism of the innovation fund is that it really targets the status quo companies that can afford to do some innovation, but doesn't really allow for the scale up. Do you agree? And what do you see as a better way to finance the clean tech in Europe?
So yes, I absolutely agree with your analysis of the Innovation Fund to date and how it's worked until now, but maybe I need to nuance it a little bit so that we get really to the root of the problem. And I think that problem also shows the fact that in Europe we are kind of operating in a mindset that hasn't fully evolved to be geared towards the newcomers that actually need to enter the market. At the moment, the market is very much skewed in favor of the incumbents. And so what we've seen with the first calls of the Innovation Fund is that indeed it was, let's say, the large companies mostly, more than 70%, even for small project calls, that were passing the financial maturity criteria. And this is because our understanding of risk when it comes to scaling up innovation in Europe is somehow that we play it very safe. So the financial maturity criteria is, you sort of either meet it or you don't. And so often we've had the case of innovators sort of meeting all criteria the week after the Innovation Fund call had decided against them, or the understanding of risk and maturity for innovators has to be different, right? The whole point of an instrument is to step in and take on some of that risk and actually bridge the gap, and so in a way allow the innovator to move beyond this point, and not really to say, oh, just because you're not actually at the level of kind of financial maturity of a corporation, we're not going to give you the grant. This is not the point. And so we also noticed that innovators struggle to get commercial loans, right? And so then all of these problems sort of feed and give us the original problem I referred to, which is the investment gap. And so some of the instruments we suggested that could fill this gap are guarantees, so public guarantees for innovators. And so we've already seen positive signals in that regard in the wind package, but also there's much more that can be done there. Now, also, I would like to agree with Georg on the fact that the Innovation Fund is still tiny compared to the rest of the ETS revenues. And so now there is a question on how they can be best leveraged. And of course, the member states are the sort of key deciding actors in this. But at the same time, I think we could create a guidebook of different financial instruments that do help to alleviate or like to sort of step in and minimize the risk for innovators, exactly to create a friendlier environment for the industrial newcomers. And so, they do exist in Europe. We do have this next generation of industry here, but unfortunately, the messages that they're constantly getting is, that the instruments we have been developing to date are still not favoring them or understanding their particular needs. And so, it's not all lost. We can still fix this, but we have to move extremely quickly. And I don't think we can afford taking, let's say, a year off just because it's an electoral year in Europe and returning to this debate in the summer of 2025 to really properly step forward, just because the next 18 months are critical in safeguarding some of these competitive advantages that we've got now. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing positive agreements by the end of the year or into 2024 in this regard.
Mm-hmm. Jakob, so you've also worked a lot on the ETS and also the ways to finance the clean tech. What do you think of what you have just heard? And also, is there a specific way that we can take more advantage of the existing funds, such as the innovation funds, but also probably other ways to finance? We have heard, yes, state guarantees, but I'm sure that the toolbox can be even wider.
So about 7 years ago, in 2016, I negotiated the ETS reform back in the previous mandate. And I had a sit down with a lobbyist paid for by a Swedish steel manufacturer, and they told me that it doesn't matter if you increase the ambition of the ETS, if the price of the allowances increase. We have no available technology to implement that would reduce our emissions. So if you increase the price, that would decrease our production. That's what they told me. And I said, but I've heard of this way of making steel with hydrogen instead. Isn't that possible? And they said, yes, but it's so expensive, it's in the future, we can't do that. But luckily, we didn't listen to them. We made a quite ambitious reform in the previous mandate, which increased the price of the ETS allowance by about 200%. That actually changed the calculus for that very same steel manufacturer, and then they launched a pilot project to produce steel with zero carbon, with hydrogen instead. And now, in this term, they actually got funding by the Innovation Fund, which accelerated their timing with almost 10 years. So even though the Innovation Fund is small right now, it should be bigger, it still plays an important part. And I would ask all of my colleagues running for re-election in the next term, please fight for a stronger ETS and a larger portion of those revenues going into European funding. Because I think if we want to be competitive, we need to have more of the climate spending on the European level rather than on the domestic level. And here I think the Innovation Fund plays a really important part, because we cannot only have carbon pricing to shape the investments that the companies make on individual products, because some products, it's too big of a risk to make that investment, because there's not investment certainty. Some projects that are more futuristic need the public funding. We cannot expect the market to do everything, to take all the risks. Some of the risk has to be carried by the public with an innovation fund, but those revenues should be raised by the polluters, not by the taxpayers. So we should not strengthen the European budget by raising the member states' fees. I don't think that's publicly feasible. We should rather raise the European spending by making sure that polluters pay more for their crimes.
Mm-hmm. Interesting points. Kurt, you wanted to reply to Susanna, I believe, and
yes.
also maybe last question, because I'm very aware that you have to leave in a few minutes. So yesterday we had this panel on the Net Zero Industry Act, and they suggested so that another way to enhance the scale-up of clean tech is also just to cut the cost of the clean tech, which is what you can do by creating a bigger market. So allowing our companies to grow in the US, for instance, in Canada, UK, and this is what we would be able to do by standardizing so the regulatory framework. Are you basically, at what stage are we in the discussions with the US?
Yeah. First, I should say what Jacob is saying is incredibly important. It's critical, and I really would like to applaud you for your work on this. You know, last year the ETS raised revenues of 38 billion euros that go to the member states. In the years to come, until 2030, member states will have hundreds of billions of euros in ETS revenues. And we have now agreed with the Parliament's support that 100% of these ETS revenues need to go into investment for energy and climate. So there's a fantastic potential there. And the attractiveness is indeed that we make the polluter pay, and the revenues go back into the decarbonization innovation. And that is actually what the rest of the world is looking at and is very interested in now, in replicating, also triggered by the CBAM. The point I wanted to come back to is on the newcomers. We are very sensitive to this. And that's why, for example, we have introduced small-scale calls or calls in the Innovation Fund for small-scale projects. But we also have a panoply of instruments. There is Horizon Europe. There is the European Innovation Council with a budget of 11 billion euros to take equity stakes also in newcomers, in startups. We have InvestEU. We are experimenting with other ways of doing it. For example, we have a partnership with Breakthrough Energy, the Catalyst program, where we look indeed at newcomers, startups that have a big potential for saving on emissions. So we have a whole toolbox already, and what we now try to do with the STEP proposal is to bring this together and help applicants guide as quickly as possible to where the best tool is for what the entrepreneur or the innovator wants to do. And we will do this regardless of whether we get additional money for STEP or not. We're also introducing a sovereignty seal, so that when a project is selected through such a competitive process at European level, but there is no money in the European budget, it gets that seal, and with that seal it can go to a member state and say, fund me with your ETS revenues, no more evaluation to be done, no more state aid notification to be done. The member state can simply put money in it, and only in projects in the territory of that member state. In terms of standardization and other ways of doing it, we are discussing this with the US. It's going more slowly than I would have hoped for. There's a lot of talk about the IRA in the US and the attractiveness for investors, but there's also a lot of uncertainty there. The US, for example, has still not decided on the definition of low carbon or green hydrogen that it would support, which is creating a lot of uncertainty there. The US has not said whether that hydrogen that would be supported by the IRA could be exported or not, which is creating a lot of uncertainty for possible investors. So it's not as if the IRA is the manna that attracts everyone and everything is bright in the US. But where we need to be vigilant is that we cannot be complacent because of this. We need to get our act together. Standardization is very important, defining, for example, what is green steel. But also, we are working, reflecting on how we can create a more active policy of lead markets, which is what is happening with hybrid and H2 green steel. 2 projects for green steel in Sweden, funded by the Innovation Fund. They have their order books already fully filled by companies like IKEA, BMW, that want to buy green steel with a premium, an additional cost, because the green steel is more expensive. So we believe that if we could find a policy of guaranteed offtakes for green products in the future, that those would create an additional stimulus for the clean tech manufacturing in Europe.
And yeah, just 1 second, maybe just a quick follow-up question. Is the idea of a climate club something that the Commission still defends and pursue?
The Climate Club will be launched in Dubai at the COP28. There are countries that have a lot of ambitions for it and others that are rather skeptical, but we from the Commission will do what we can to make it work and to give it a fair chance, especially to concentrate on international industrial decarbonization. So we believe that there is no guaranteed success, but we have to give it a try.
And so it's going to be about standards in the production of steel and iron. What is it going to be about?
It will be a forum where countries come together at the highest possible level to look at what are the best possible decarbonization policies for industries, especially energy-intensive industries, and then see how we can align methodologies, ways of measuring embedded CO2, for example, things like that.
Was it announced already?
Well, it was announced, it was agreed at the G7 in Elmo under the German presidency.
Yeah.
And the official launch will happen, I believe, on the 1st of December in Dubai.
Okay.
And it will be co-chaired by Chile and Germany, with a full participation of the European Commission.
Okay, thank you. Jakob?
Yes, so more on the green steel, because I think this is so fascinating. If you compare the manufacturing process of using regular ways of manufacturing steel and the green steel with hydrogen, the traditional way is much cheaper and the hydrogen version is much more expensive because it's a new technology. The ETS do some to mitigate this by making sure that the old technology pays for its climate impact, but still there is a price difference. However, if you look at the total added cost for the actual vehicle, if you use normal steel or green steel, what is the change in the price for the car? It's in the tens of euros more expensive to use green steel. It's a very, very small cost. And the PR value for the car manufacturer to say to the consumer, do you want a car that is manufactured with zero carbon? That PR value is, of course, a lot more than 10 euros, which is the added cost of using green steel. And I think that we should benefit from this and not only expect some manufacturers to use that PR value, we should actually have a green steel mandate to mandate all the consumers of steel in Europe that they should have year 1% of all their steel should be green steel, second year 2%, and have an increasing mandate to make sure that the producers of green steel know that there is a market. And this method, I think, could be applied also for other sectors to make sure that there's investment certainty in the new technologies that are more expensive.
Mm-hmm. Susanne, I believe you wanted to react to something.
Yes, just 2 brief remarks. First of all, let's take on the green steel example. So H2 Green Steel had applied for the Innovation Fund before. They hadn't gotten it. Can I just say, had we thought about financial risk differently, we'd be much further in the game now because they would have already received the grant earlier. And so that exactly goes to show that some innovators that do require the Innovation Fund, that eventually get it, but at first they struggle to get through. But on the STEP proposal, just Kurt, if I could return to your point that member states then get to decide how to best use this. Well, the issue with this approach is that from the investor side, this gives you no visibility or predictability over what will happen. And actually, how can you sort of judge whether a political change then in a member state fundamentally will affect the decisions made on which projects get the sovereignty seal or not, depending on various factors. And so effectively, what we really needed was a response that matched IRA, not necessarily in the choice of instrument, but in the clarity and predictability that it gave to investors and clean tech innovators. And unfortunately, the STEP proposal doesn't achieve that. And so we're left with the question unanswered, and then that brings another question to my mind, which is, are we ready to be left out of the race?
Okay, Georg,
in case you have some final remarks, otherwise I also have another question for you, because Bruegel just published another research, I believe it was your colleagues, about the need to create a clean tech partnership to secure goods for decarbonization. So this is very much linked to the idea of a sort of club, but more for securing these goods and less for probably standardization. But I would like you to tell us more and how this fit with what has been said before.
Allow me to deviate from your question, if
Sure.
I may, with something on an outlook of something that we are planning. Bruegel will set up a clean tech tracker where we have on a website a bit a view on what happens in the clean tech area. And that brings me to, in my view, a very important issue that we need to tackle. For me, this transition is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And predictability throughout the process is going to be very important, and predictability needs good process. And good process includes that we all are based on a similar databases and understanding of the world, or at least we discuss about where we share views on the world. And we have seen in the energy crisis how shaky the data were that we were based on, that a lot of very important things that in the US are available at your fingertips are not available in Europe. And now in the discussion on the Net Zero Industrial Act, again, it is very unclear what is there, what we are good at, where strengths are. So we are making policy kind of out of gut feelings. And that is not, first of all, it's not good. But second, it's also not giving predictability, because nobody kind of can think of if the facts change, how policy might change. So we need something like a European Energy Agency or something that provides independent and very robust and capacity for setting out data and modeling to enable policymakers to kind of get a joint understanding of where we are standing. Because other than that, we are going from year to year, seeing a development here or there and trying to quickly adjust, but we need a firm fact basis, also doing more evaluations of the policies that we are doing in order to understand whether they have worked. Because, I mean, it's really a long-term process, and I think in the end, the region with the better governance will have a huge advantage over the region that is just kind of doing the ad hoc thing. So for Europe, I think it is a challenge that we need to live up to.
Yeah. I'm afraid we really need to wrap up, but thank you so much for such a passionate conversation. And I would like to have an applause for our speaker. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Glad you could stay here till the end.